I still technically consider myself a beginner. I've been knitting for like what, 2 years, maybe going on 3 years now. And so I feel like, like I'm good enough to read a pattern all the way through. I've made some semi-advanced pieces, but technically I do consider myself still a beginner. I thought we would sit and we would go through everything, for the most part, everything that I've knit as a beginner. This is our little pile right here. I love most of the pieces that I've made. I don't know, tell me if it's just me. I feel like I love my knits. I love the things that I've made, but I don't wear them, I guess, as often as I would like to. That's why this year I want to be more intentional with my knitting, mainly like color schemes and styles that match, the clothes that I would wear every day. When I first started knitting, friend, I was on it. I was so eager to just knit every pattern that I found. My color choices were a lot more adventurous, and so I don't know, in a way it's kind of interesting to just see how I've grown as a fiber artist. But enough yapping, enough yapping. Let's go through the pile. On the top of the pile we have my raglan top. I am so in love with this top. I don't wear this top that often because first of all it gets super hot. I don't know, I don't want to say that I don't wear my knits because wool is itchy. For the most part I can kind of get over it, but sometimes they're too itchy, and especially like a top like this where I'm not wearing a shirt underneath. But how gorgeous is this top actually? This is probably my favorite yarn that I've ever owned of all time. Like, this trimming color is my Cascade in the shade Olive Oil. I guess we're not there yet, but my sample for the bandwidth bonnet is in the same color, and I absolutely love this color. I thought about for a little bit like making a bigger garment, maybe like a top, not necessarily a cardigan. I don't think I'd wear a cardigan in this color, but this is my raglan tee. This was my first time ever doing the raglan pattern. I followed the made in the moment video tutorial on YouTube. Wait, what's the front, what's the back? Okay, this is the front of the top. This is one of my favorite pieces that I've ever made. It's like a little baby tee. I will say I do want to go back and remake a raglan. I know, so much more about knitting. I also don't wear it because, what's this called? Like the underarm part, I probably should have done like some decreases, and then when you put it on, it's kind of like a lot of extra fabric, if that makes sense. But this is one of my favorite things that I've ever made. I think this color scheme is actually so beautiful. I think this is something that I would still wear, that still kind of matches my vibe, a few years later. My raglan tee, we love her so much. I don't wear her nearly enough. I will say that this is a mix of acrylic and wool yarn. Like, I have some Cascade skeins mixed in here. That's my wool. I had some acrylic skeins. I didn't know very much about yarn fibers when I was first starting out with knitting, so not all of my pieces are animal fibers. Some of them are using acrylic, but I love the way that this came out. This is very beautiful. Okay, I feel like since I already mentioned it, we have to talk about this bonnet. I feel like I made this technically maybe in like the second-ish year of knitting. This is the bandwidth bonnet. Friend, if you have not downloaded the pattern, what are you doing? I will say when I first started knitting, or like what really encouraged me to learn how to knit, was I wanted to learn how to make like a bonnet and arm warmers without really having to think about it. And so when I kind of figured out the construction, I made so many bonnets, and then of course that inspired me to write an official pattern. This bonnet, I've had so many versions of her. This is just, the one that I have in my stack. But when I was first learning how to knit, I loved making bonnets. Again, we're using this super gorgeous Cascade yarn. This was one of the first, I don't necessarily want to say nice yarn, like I'm not trying to imply that non-animal fiber yarn can't be nice, but this was like one of the first like wool yarns, one of the first yarns that I bought, not from Joann's or from Michael's, and I fell in love with the color like instantly. I feel like this is definitely very beginner friendly. One of my favorite things I think I've made as a beginner. I guess since we're on bonnets, I made this bonnet as well. This yarn, how gorgeous, how gorgeous. I actually have only worn this maybe a handful of times outside of the house. I think I need to find a way to style it. The yarn is very, what's the word, like unique. And so I'm kind of just looking for more outfits to pair it with, but I actually got this yarn from an estate sale. I love the texture on the yarn. This was made using 6mm needles. Yes, this was before I had an official bonnet pattern, and so it is significantly bigger than, my bandwidth bonnet. But like I mentioned, when I first was learning how to knit, I kind of just made like the same things over and over again. You'll see as we get to the rest of my stash, I kind of just made the same things over and over again. It was just easy for me. I don't know, it was just easy for me. And even now, like I'm kind of thinking like, oh, what should I make? Oh, what should I make? I don't know, like maybe I should return to old patterns and patterns that I already like, instead of like trying to think of something new, at least for now. I feel like I picked up knitting fairly easy. Of course, I did crochet first, which I feel like was a huge help. But during my first year, I completed a pattern test and at the end of the year I made a cardigan. I feel like really what helped was like making the same patterns over and over and like really mastering a pattern before I moved on to the next one. And then when I moved on to the next one, you know, like whatever new skills I learned, kind of doing that over and over. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like that is really what like helped me my first year of knitting. And so I was able to, you know, just freehand a bonnet like this when I was fairly new into my knitting journey. Yes, we love her. We love her. I will say what I missed the most about being brand new to knitting was how experimental I used to be. My knits now, like I've mentioned, I'm trying to focus more on like practical wearable pieces. When I first was knitting, I just wanted to make like the cutest, coolest, what would photograph the best, things that I was very excited to share. Just looking at my pile and seeing how colorful it is and seeing like how many different and unique pieces that I have, it's making me so happy and it's making me want to make, you know, more things like this, even if maybe all the time they're not the most practical. I swear every time I sit down to film, there's somebody trying to honk, like chill out. I don't remember the exact order in which I've made all of my knits, but I can say almost for certain this was like the first completed object that I had. I know how much I've progressed because I remember doing the ribbing on this hat. I think it isn't knit to purl to, and I struggled so bad trying to keep up with the knit to purl to, and I'm like, wow, we've really come a long way. I followed just like a simple beanie tutorial on YouTube. I'm using this chunky yarn. It might be like the wool ease yarn from Lion Brand if I'm not mistaken. And then I crocheted these little stars and I sewed on like little buttons and beads, and I don't know, this piece is so fun. I don't know, I've come such a long way. I think where I am in my knitting journey now, I would never think to just make a silly little star hat, but this was such a fun thing to do. And honestly, now that I'm thinking of it, maybe I'll make like an updated version of it. Would that be kind of cool to like remake some of the patterns that I made as a beginner? Do I wear this hat? I think I've worn it maybe a couple of times. I'm not really a hat person, but hats are so easy and so fun to make. When I say I knit the same thing over and over and over during my first year of knitting, I am not being funny. This is my first ever basic open knit. How cute are these colors? Let's get into it. This is a blend of acrylic and cotton yarn, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, like this pink right here. Can you even tell on camera? But like this pink right here is cotton yarn. I think the rest of this were just like scraps of acrylic that I had. The basic open knit pattern by Cara Lee is hands down my all-time favorite knitting pattern of all time ever. Literally ever. This was the pattern that really like encouraged me to learn how to knit. 2-3 years later, I'm still obsessed with this pattern, but this was my first ever version of it. Since this version, I've made the basic open knit like a million times, not even being funny. Like I have so many different iterations of it. I made my sleeves. These were probably one of my favorite. I'm using the basic open knit pattern. The only thing is like when I did the body, I obviously made it, you know, so much shorter, and then these are my sleeves. How cute. I will say I think out of everything I've ever made ever, is that a reach? Everything out of everything that I've ever made ever, this is my favorite color scheme, but it low-key might be. This is 100% scrap yarn. Some of it is wool, some of it is acrylic. I think my favorite yarn that I used, this little section right here, this was my Malabry Show yarn in the shade Archangel. I'll never forget that shade name just because I thought it was so cool. I do stay warm when I wear these, and so I feel like in the fall, when the weather is like getting slightly cooler, these are my favorite time to wear my sleeves. But I made these using the basic open knit pattern. I will say also when I first started knitting, I was more adventurous. Is that the word, adventurous? I think now, like when I follow patterns, when I follow tutorials, I almost follow them to the T. When I was first starting out knitting, I was like, you know what would be, like what would happen if I tried to make sleeves instead of an entire body and follow the pattern, you know, the way that it was written? What if I tried to, you know, do my own thing? And I ended up with really cool things like this. I also made these sleeves using the basic open knit pattern. This is using cotton yarn though. And so I like to wear these when I roller skate, you know, because once you're out there skating, it gets a little bit hot. Wait, are my sleeves inside out? And so I like to wear these, you know, when it's a little bit warmer. When I'm roller skating, it does get a little bit hot, so sometimes I'll wear my sleeves. I'll wear these in the summer. I modified this version just a little bit because I found on the basic open knit, like the way that the pattern is written, the arms end up being too wide, and so I modified the pattern, and you can see my arms are a lot skinnier on this one, but I love this piece so much. Friend, I was not joking when I said this is my favorite pattern of all time. This one right here, I made this at the beginning of last year, so I guess this would be closer to like my 1.5-ish years into knitting. But again, this is another basic open knit, and it is using this absolutely gorgeous Noro yarn. This was my first time ever owning Noro yarn. I've seen specifically so many basic open knits being made with Noro yarn, and I always knew that one day I was gonna have a version that was made with Noro yarn, and here she is. Like I've mentioned, like you've seen, I've literally made a million versions of the basic open knit, but for some reason when I made this version I was having so many issues on it. First time that I made it, I made the size absolutely too big. I don't know if you've made the basic open knit, friend, but the way that the construction is it's like you knit it in the round up until you get to the armpits, and then you split off and you work back and forth, and then eventually you'll seam up the shoulders. Having to frog this was absolutely a nightmare. I lost a lot of Noro yarn in the process, and I was like, how crazy is it that I'm not even a beginner really anymore? I've made this pattern how many times and like I'm still making mistakes? That's the thing about knitting. That's the thing about knitting. It will always humble you. It really does not matter how long you've been doing it. Doesn't matter how good you are at it. It really doesn't matter the pattern, how many times you've worked through the pattern. Like sometimes there's just something that happens beyond your control, and I'm just like, okay, I guess, but I absolutely love this. I have made more versions of the basic open knit. I have that white one that I made earlier this year. I don't even know if you can see. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see, but like on my mannequin that's in the background, she has on a yellow basic open knit that I literally gave up on once I got to the sleeves, because we know, you know, like I know, me and sleeves are not friends. I do not like knitting sleeves on really too much of anything, but I've made this pattern even more times than what has been showed right here. And how many do I have right here in front of me? And I literally have 4 of my versions right here. Out of every pattern that I've ever owned, this is the only one that I've worked through more than 3 times. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I've probably worked through it like 5 times. Somebody commented recently like, oh my gosh, I want to try the basic open knit pattern, but it's so much money. And I'm like, friend, I get you. I get you. I think back then I was just so like, I needed that pattern. I did not care how much it cost. And then also I wasn't familiar with how much traditionally knitting patterns cost. But if you're on the fence about it, am I gonna say it's worth it? Yes, I am gonna say it's worth it. You've seen how many like variations of this pattern that I've made. I think if you like this style and it's something that you know you're gonna work through maybe multiple times, it's worth it. It's an expensive pattern. It's the most expensive pattern that I own. 100%, 100%. I understand. I get it. But me personally, if I had to go back, I would buy it again. You've literally seen all of my versions of the basic open knit. This was my first ever pattern test. This is the, what is it called? Maybe the Valencia tee by Made by Rosh. This was my first time ever using fingering weight yarn. And like, what am I trying to say? When I was first starting off knitting, I wasn't even really aware that there were different, not necessarily that I wasn't aware that there were different thicknesses or like different weights of yarn, but I kind of in my mind just thought, okay, we have like regular yarn, worsted yarn, and then we have chunky yarn. I didn't realize how like thin yarn weights could get, and I also didn't realize people were making entire garments out of like very thin weight yarn. And so when I first got the pattern for this garment and I saw that the recommended yarn was fingering weight yarn, I just went online, looked up fingering weight yarn, and I was like, okay, I don't really know what that is. And then when it arrived, I was like, oh my God, this yarn is so skinny. It took me a majority of the time to make, I guess we're gonna call it the body for lack of a better word, to make the body, and then the cap sleeves and the bottom, I probably knit those in like less than a week. So I worked on the body part, the bust part, and the back part for like a majority of the summer, maybe like 3 weeks. I will say now, kind of looking back on it, I was a very, very ambitious beginner. Like I remember, was this the first time that I ever worked through a knitting pattern? No, I worked through the basic open knit knitting pattern. So this was maybe like my second time working through a knitting pattern. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, this construction was pretty advanced for me to tackle this during my first year of knitting. But I fell in love with the pattern so much. I was like, I'm going to figure it out no matter what. Like no matter what happens, I am going to figure out this knit. And this is to this day one of my favorite things that I've ever knit. This is using the Malabrigo I don't know what they call their fingering weight yarn, but I do know that the shade name is in Lotus. I think I was a lot more eager to like apply for pattern tests or like be a part of a pattern test when I was a brand new fresh beginner. Me now, a couple years later, I really don't have any intentions on doing another pattern test. And that's not to say that I'm not going to never ever do another pattern test, but I feel like where I'm at right now in my life, like I don't really want to do another pattern test. So I think this was pretty cool considering this is my first ever pattern test. And considering that I was still in my first year of knitting, like I'm still in awe of myself about it. But this is the Valencia tee and she's so cute. I will say I've been wanting to go back and remake this pattern. And what I love the most about Rosh's pattern is that it's made to measure, and so I could use a slightly like thicker weight yarn if I wanted to. I was thinking of maybe making something in DK, but honestly the fingering weight yarn is so cute. But when I do remake it, I don't want the v-neck to be so deep. With this top right now, I have to wear it with like a little bandeau top, and I want a version that I could just wear by itself and like wear with jeans. And so I've been meaning to remake this pattern for a little bit of time, but I just haven't, you know, gotten serious about it. Since we're talking about Rosh patterns, this is my halter top. I'm actually making another version of this halter top in a slightly thinner weight yarn, but this is the Lion brand 24/7 cotton yarn, and I made this top because I had an event to go to and I was like, I need a halter top for it, and so that's why it's in this red. I don't traditionally wear red, but the look called for red, and this is one of my favorite things I've ever made, and I made it so quickly. Honestly, I've been thinking, like I am making this halter top right now in a thinner weight yarn, but this Lion brand yarn was so perfect. I'm thinking about maybe getting like a white and a black and just like knitting some of these up really quick, and that way I'll just have like a top to throw on. Like sometimes I just want, you know, a really simple and a quick outfit, and I feel like this halter is perfect. I definitely would consider this beginner friendly as well. You can kind of see the construction, you just knit in the round for the body, and then you split off for like the cups, I guess we're gonna call it, and then the string. So I don't know, I really love this. Another mindless project, something I'd be able to make without having to think too hard about it. A couple of years later, this is still one of my favorite things that I've ever made. Okay, friend, I literally saved the best for last. This is my cardigan number, I want to say it's cardigan number 9. I always want to say either cardigan number 7 or cardigan number 9, but I think it's cardigan number 9. This is the pattern by My Favorite Things Knitwear. It already was kind of crazy to me that I completed a knitting pattern test during my first year of knitting, but being able to knit a cardigan during my first year of knitting was like a huge accomplishment for me. Every winter, the second it gets below 60 degrees, I wear my cardigan. I was talking about how I couldn't like keep up, where is it, with the knit to purl to on this beanie, and literally on this cardigan, on the cuffs, on the bottom, all knit one, purl one. And I was like, wow, in 1 year, I went from struggling so bad with knit two, purl two to now being able to do knit one, purl one effortlessly. I feel like the pattern test really like catapulted. Is that the word? Like, I feel like by the end of that pattern test, I was such a stronger knitter. I think one of my favorite details are the saddle shoulders. This was my first time ever making saddle shoulders. I literally had never even heard of that technique before I made this cardigan, but it's in this maroon color. This is, I want to say Barocco. What's the name of the yarn? Beetroot. That's like the name that comes to mind. This might be the Barocco yarn in the shade Beetroot. Don't quote me. As I'm progressing into my knitting journey, as I'm getting better, as I plan to make more advanced things, will I block minutes? Yeah. I've just been kind of lazy. I never blocked this cardigan, but don't sue me. I remember the pattern ended the sleeves like maybe halfway where they are now, and I was like, oh no, there's no way that I can stop the sleeves here. But I'm thinking, and I'm like, probably if I blocked it, it would stretch out a little bit, but I don't know, friend. I don't know. This is what we got, and I love her so dearly. My pride and my joy, my favorite thing that I've ever made. Okay, friends, so that's all of the knits that I have. Everything that I knit as a beginner knitter, everything that I knit during my first year and a half-ish of knitting. Let me know which one of these items was your favorite. Do you have a pattern that you tend to go back to over and over and over again? If you're still a beginning knitter too, do you have a favorite pattern? I'd love to know. Please share with me. I don't got nothing else to say. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and I will see you next Sunday.